Broadcasting from Alphabet City at 4242 Main Street, Joe Leary along with Patrick Shelton. Everything Film with Film Robot is presented by Agencyclick. Our guest is Aaron Chapman. I've known Aaron a long time. I've only had momentary conversations with you in and out in passing.
True enough.
But it's great to have you on the show. And
Thank you,
Patrick, Aaron has written and authored a number of books. This man knows the history of this fair city we're in, both the notorious, the good, the bad, the ugly, the nightlife, the entertainment. And one of the things, before we get into your full litany of work, Aaron, one thing I wanted to ask you about is the history of film in the city and surrounding area of Vancouver. Because I remember as a kid, McCabe and Mrs. Miller was shot in Vancouver. But as a kid, I was impressed thinking, oh my God, Hollywood is here in Vancouver.
Yeah.
That really was kind of like the starting point, was it not?
Well, you think about those years before Hollywood North, that were, when those film productions did come up, they were a rarity, like that. And I have a weird connection to McCabe and Mrs. Miller because my mother, my biological mother, it gets a little complicated with the family tree here, but my biological mother met my biological father on McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and I am the happy product of that result. So I always wanted to thank Robert Altman for directing my birth or something like that, or my, he wasn't there for the conception, I don't think. But anyway, so I always have when I watch that movie, I get the sort of a ghostly feeling that I'm somewhere sort of traveling in one of those extras in the background or something.
But did that put Vancouver on the map?
Well, I think so. That was a huge, production at the time. There was Carnal Knowledge before that. The Nicholson and Margaret picture that was up here too, just before that. But that was a real sort of benchmark film, I think, because you didn't really have anything. There were lots of independent little productions and things like that as well going on, and later on, that surge of Hollywood North stuff that films started happening, and really in the late '80s, I guess. But. It's interesting picture, interesting time.
We talked about we talked about in the other show. Correct me, I'm trying to remember the place, but maybe you could all these movies came here, and it was the place in Victoria, the castle. It was like the was it Belmont?
Crigdera Castle.
No, it was they use it for the X-Men now and everything.
Right.
The Changeling was filmed there.
Okay.
The one that you were talking about, Warren Beatty, was there. They all came for this one place in Victoria. Oh God, it slips my mind now.
Right.
But anyway, we talked about it, but you couldn't get that in. You couldn't get that. So they came here, and this is the 70s I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah.
So we're going back. We're going back before everything kind of went mainstream Vancouver. So it wasn't even the dollar. You couldn't get that in LA and stuff. So they came here for the scenery, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk about that, of what you saw.
I think that's very true. There were film locations up here that they found that they. It seems like there are key people that are in the process along the way. And Altman was a big one because he sort of fell in love with Vancouver, it seemed. And he was living up here, for an extended period as well. So, some of those film locations, and somebody like me who's a Vancouver historian, I sometimes look at old movies that are shot in Vancouver, and you'll see some stuff that's not there anymore, or I'm always trying to think of what street is that. I'm not looking at the actors. I'm looking in the background to see the buildings that are there. That old George Segal movie, Russian Roulette, is very good for that they shot up at the Hotel Vancouver, but they did a bunch of stuff around Chinatown and some other places there. Anyway, there's lots of different things here. So Vancouver, which rarely plays itself in film,
Never.
It's always Seattle, Portland. Sometimes it's even Chicago. Sometimes New York. I think it's even been New Delhi at one time or another, maybe with Mission Impossible or something. But
nothing says U.S. besides USA Today mailboxes.
Right. Yeah.
They're everywhere. In every movie, they actually do close-ups of a mailbox. I'm going, why did you zoom in on the USA Today? So they'll take a Canada Post mailbox, they'll put USA Today. For some reason, that just says America.
Yeah,
I guess,
exactly.
Right?
And I remember I was on tour with my old band, and we were in Helsinki, Finland, of all places. And I was about 2 months in the tour, and I was a little bit homesick. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to go see a movie. Take my mind off things. Got the day off. Got a show tonight, but got the sort of day to myself. So I'm thinking, take my mind off being away from home and seeing friends and family and things like this. So I go walk in and I go see Rumble in the Bronx, which is shot in Vancouver, and it's shot mostly about 2 blocks away from where I lived. And I just sort of sat in the theater and laughed by myself just watching this, thinking I
That-
can't get away from it.
That's the Jackie Chan one.
That's
The
exactly
Jackie Chan.
yeah.
It's supposed to be New York.
Which
yeah.
Brooklyn has mountains in the background. Yeah.
I have noticed a preponderance of car commercials are shot using the bridges
Oh,
in
gosh.
Vancouver.
Oh, God.
Why,
All of
why,
them.
why is that?
God, that's a good question. I don't know. Do you know? I don't know why that. But it's one of. I guess they look certain. There's a certain majestic thing about a car traveling over a bridge or something. Especially
no, but
if
I
it's
like-
Burrard Bridge, which is a nice looking bridge.
No, I think it's phenomenal that they go over the Georgia Viaduct. They take a right turn they are automatically on the Sea to Sky Highway.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'd like to take that route to get to Whistler.
Yeah. You see so many of them now too. I wonder, people in the States. I wonder who watch these things and think, where in Chicago is that? Where in Seattle is that?
Well,
No, it's not even
amongst
that. Vancouver.
Aaron Chapman's body of work, now you've done histories of the Commodore Ballroom, which of course legendary. I think Sammy Davis Jr. played there as a kid. I think.
Yeah.
And a lot of these locations, I guess, have been used on multiple movie and television programs.
Oh yeah, there's an old Tom Jones, Catherine Zeta-Jones commercial, and I think it was for Verizon or a cell phone company or something like that. That was shot there. They've shot a bunch of things there at the Commodore and at the Penthouse, which is another place I've written about. Big Eyes, the Tim Burton film, was shot there, of course, and that was interesting to be down there while they were shooting that. There was a discussion at one point they wanted to put me in the movie just sort of as a drunk at the end of the bar, which I thought, well, this is the role I'm born to play, and I'll just sort of sit there with a hat on, sort of looking into my glass. But I had to be there every day for about 10 hours for 4 or 5 days in a row, and I couldn't get away to do it. So
And then
it's
when
my constant regret.
And then so when filming was over, you just went back there for another 10 days?
Exactly.
Excellent,
Yeah, just to
excellent.
absorb
That's-
the room. Yeah,
just had to
exactly.
see,
Yeah.
it's like getting into character.
I remember years ago being on set when Chris Haddock was shooting Da Vinci's Inquest
I just saw Chris the
and
other day,
Intelligence, and they were using the Penthouse. I mean, again, you talk about a historic Vancouver locale.
Oh,
you
yeah.
don't come more historic than the Penthouse.
Well, there's very few places in Vancouver that are multi-generational places that your grandparents went to, your parents went to, and you could go to, because the city's changed so much before our very eyes that way. So you can count them on one hand. You think of the P&E, the Orpheum, the Commodore, Stanley Park. It starts to sort of trickle down. Certainly, as I say, the Commodore, the Penthouse, the Hollywood Theater, which just is reopened, which is cool. An old 1930s era movie or cinema house. So. But there's very few places that, and these sort of places make up the DNA of the city, I always like to say, in that regard. So, as I say, we've done a very good job of bringing the new, but we haven't done the best job of keeping the old in this city. And so they're precious places. Yeah.
It's funny you should mention that, Aaron, because you're old when you refer to places as they used to be, not what they are now.
Yeah.
But what made you the historian of the area that you became?
Gosh. Well, I would take off when I was a touring musician for like about 20 years, and I would take off on tour for a few months at a time, and come home and I would see that the bookstore is now a pizza place, or this store is now that. And it's always things become the pizza place. The pizza place never leaves. It always is the same. So, I began to sort of notice how the city had changed, and I'm born and raised here, so I remember being a kid and Vancouver and seeing log booms in Falls Creek, where I remember the way that the old Carling O'Keefe brewery used to stink up all of Arbutus there with that smell of hops. So I remember how the city's changed and how it smells different in a way. And I think I was always writing, and the nice thing about writing is you don't have to do a sound check for it, or get in a van with 600 or 700 people and drive 8 hours to do it.
Right.
And it just sort of it started to build up maybe about 20 years ago, where I was always sort of scribbling a few things and writing and little short pieces, but it sort of just developed on its own, and it was a way for me to kind of get off the road a little bit in that way too. So I've been fortunate with it.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, because
Yes, sir.
you know what? Everybody's got this, and and just correct me. Give us a little gem that nobody knows. It could be in your writings. You have to just give me one paragraph of something in Vancouver that nobody knows and you found out.
Well, let me see here. I'll do something. What I'm working on right now is a book about. I'd been interviewing old Vice Squad detectives from the Vancouver Police Department from the 1970s.
Right.
And those guys have the greatest stories. If you can get those guys talking, it's very difficult to get police to talk, even the older guys. But if you can get those guys talking, it's an amazing. You hear the most amazing stories stuff that never made the papers.
Right.
So I'm working on a book. It's called Vancouver Vice. It's going to be out later this year. And, in the discussions and looking back at the 70s and 80s, you would go down to the West End today and you would have no idea that there was a street prostitution problem in, you know, the late 70s and early 80s in Vancouver. And, you know, if you drive around the West End, Broughton and Pendrell and some of these, you know, there's streets that are blocked off. There's either a little mini park or a roundabout. And people just think, well, these are sort of traffic calm measure. There's a nice little parklet, you know, outside of your apartment building that has blocked off the traffic between two blocks. All those, when you walk around them today, no one would have any idea that those were all made originally to deter cars from driving around looking for prostitutes.
Yes.
You know, so
Yes.
Again, it's sort of part of the DNA of the city that we forget these things over the years, that some of the reasons why things are the way they are.
He is author Aaron Chapman. Everything Film with Film Robot is presented by Agencyclick and broadcasting from Alphabet City at 4242 Main Street. One of the things that's fascinated me, and I'm sure it's in your book or had been in one of the previous books, the story of Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling actor who actually died in the West End of Vancouver under some specious circumstances, because wasn't he here with like a 15-year-old female escort or something?
17. Beverly Adlin was 17 years old, and I think she had the permission of her parents to be traveling with dear Errol. But he died in 1959 here in Vancouver, and it was a huge thing at the time, a big star of his stature. Even though his star had faded a little bit, that he died here in Vancouver was a huge deal. And you know, they did the autopsy right here in Vancouver. You can go to the Vancouver Police Museum where that autopsy room is now and stand in that very room.
Interesting.
And it's interesting to be.
I did not know that. That's actually very interesting. Like here's a little thing, a little gem, right? Yeah. Flew under the radar because maybe at the time. But there's got to be a lot of stuff that we should bring back up, right? Like stories like that, bring it back up, right? That's so cool.
Aaron is the expert on this, but I was fascinated by that story. I wrote a piece in a magazine article years ago because Errol was a faded former swashbuckling movie idol that was in his 50s, and the woman was 17.
Oh, my God.
And he ends up dying in an apartment in the West End.
Yeah.
And oh my God, this rocked Hollywood.
And that building is still there at 1310 Burnaby. In fact, I had a friend that lived there, and we had a seance one night we tried to do, and the only spirits that really produced themselves were the gin and vodka that we had, unfortunately. But anyway, we tried to sort of summon Errol, but he never showed up.
Yeah.
Wow. There's things like that just aren't expected to happen.
Yeah.
And was he here buying a boat or something?
He had a boat. He had a yacht that he was trying to sell to a stockbroker here in town named George Caldo, who's an interesting guy himself. He went to jail for a little while. But anyway, he was trying to sell this yacht because he was down. He needed the money and whatnot. And apparently the coroner, when they saw Flynn, and he was only in his, I think he was only in his 50s, they thought he was a 70-year-old. Yeah. You know, his body was so ravaged by hard living and hard drinking and whatnot that he had done, you know. So
in your travels, have you done much on the time Howard Hughes occupied the Bay Shore?
Yes, I sure have. Okay. That one of my favorite stories. I did an article for the Old Vancouver Courier on that, and tracked down some of the people that had worked in Hughes's organization. And that he came here for 6 months in 1972, staying in the top floor of the Weston Bay Shore. And you can go to that room now. It's called the Howard Hughes Suite, which rents for $1,000 a night. That's sort of a fascinating story because he sort of came. You know, he hadn't been photographed since 1959. There's sort of this man of mystery. It's hard to explain what a person like Hughes was like. There's not really an equivalent today unless you sort of put Michael Jackson, Bill Gates, and somebody else
weird
together.
Combination,
you know, there's sort of the weirdness and the money all together. But a fascinating figure, that was.
Was this when he was wearing the Kleenex boxes and he was a germaphobe?
Well, this was the thing. Everybody, you know, you have this idea of the long fingernails, the long toenails, the beard. You know, he had shaved and he walked into the Bay Shore on his own. His aides were freaked out that he was now sort of leaving this fog that he was. So for a few days there, he wanted the windows open. He wanted to look at the planes flying into Vancouver, Cole Harbor there and whatnot. And then he disappeared back into that sort of drug fog that he had been in. But
I'm really interested. You know what? We got to go and talk another day. And we only got so many minutes on the show.
Man, of course,
you're a good storyteller, and I love that. And
anytime.
Yeah. No, I want to ask. And probably Joe, you're going to lead into this anyway. Is where can people see your work? And are you on social media? Have you got a website?
Yeah, I'm AaronChapman.net. My site. I'm just fixing things up there now, but I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, and you'll find any of my books in anywhere from Amazon to Chapters and anywhere else in town.
So if somebody went to Amazon right now, what do they type in? Like, what would they?
You type in my name, Aaron Chapman, A-A-R-O-N.
Aaron Chapman. Okay, Aaron Chapman. I recommend everybody.
You'll find 4 books there, and a 5th coming out next year. So.
Okay, that's great.
You had mentioned to us before we started this that you have some exciting news.
Oh yes, The Last Gang in Town, which is a book I wrote about East Vancouver street gangs in the 1970s and what the Vancouver Police Department did to fight them, has got optioned for sort of film and television.
Wow.
Now, it's kind of one of these things that, from speaking to other people about it, sometimes these things can get optioned and then it doesn't get made until like 30 years after you're dead or whatnot. So it's a bit of a lottery ticket, I suppose, and these things can get renewed and sometimes they don't get renewed and whatnot. But the team that are trying to produce it are a very capable bunch, and they want to do it as a Vancouver story. They don't want to necessarily buy it and then set it in Chicago or set it in New York. You know, they want to do it as a Vancouver story and see that it has potential that way.
So this includes the notorious Clark Park gang?
The Clark Park gang, yeah, exactly, yeah.
How bad were they by comparison to when you think of gang activity today? How bad was the Clark Park gang?
It's interesting because this wasn't organized crime, is what I tell people. It was sort of unorganized crime, and that made it all the more sort of volatile. So, today most of gang crime centers around drug trafficking and things like this, and everybody has guns. This was a little bit more, fisticuffs era of, there were a lot of burglaries, there were a lot of robberies and assaults and arsons and everything like this. The crime statistics went up in East Van immeasurably during those Clark Park gang years. And but it was a different era. These were sort of where people sort of had street. It was regional. It was
business
and neighborhood. Now a lot of these people that later on graduated into the boys that ride motorcycles now for a living and have patches on their jacket. So you have the roots of an earlier Vancouver in these people as well.
Absolutely.
So it's an interesting era.
You go back and you look at some of the stuff that I know is that the hotel associations were very strong. I'm sure you looked at that, and they used to sign 100-year leases, and I mean, they would, and it's not a coincidence. I mean, not to go off topic, but most strip bars were attached to a hotel.
Very much so. Yes, you're right.
Almost every single one that you've ever had, and cities have tried to close them down, clean up, and they go, we got 55 more years on our lease. Sorry, because the hotel association, the unions were so strong. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Very much so. And even in a broader sense, you had to order liquor through a hotel.
Right. The hotels owned a lot, right?
Back in the day, yeah. So they were very much
women could not walk in unescorted.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Exactly. The hotels owned everything for a while, and I don't know if that was mob controlled or whatever. You know more than me, but that was very strong.
Well, they kind of made their own mob. If they weren't necessarily
they were their own, right?
They became that way just
they
by
became
monopoly.
so strong.
Aaron, I don't need to heap more work on you, but what would fascinate me, I don't know if it would sell copies, but if you ever get the inspiration, write the history of Vancouver radio.
Oh my gosh!
Oh my
yes.
goodness.
That would be. I've had people talk to me before, especially there's so many different radio personalities over the years that have been a part of this city.
Yeah.
You got you got so many personalities, and you got Joe Leary as well.
There you go. Yeah,
it would be a fascinating read, and as you know, radio does tend to change rather abruptly.
Yes,
so.
Actually, if you ever look at Joe's website and stuff, this guy has more photos of pictures of people and stars with himself than anybody I know.
Yeah,
like a lot of history, and that's great.
No question.
Love talking about it.
Aaron Chapman, it's a pleasure to finally have a 20-minute conversation with you, and let's do it again. I would say continued success, but I think that goes without saying.
Thank you.
We'd love to have you back.
Anytime, guys.
And
we will, because you know what? We could go anher 20 minutes right now.
Gotcha.
What a great guest. What a great guest.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Take care.